Yunsen, and today I will analyze a game I played against Manan Dhyani. Manan Dhyani is quite strong. As you can see from the web page over here, I played against this account 6 times, and I won 4 and lost 2. That time, I won 3 and lost 2 against this account. So it was really the deciding match for me if I could keep my win streak or uh, lose to uh, lose to this account and be tied at 3-3. So yeah, uh, he started with e4. I responded with c6, knight c3, e5, bishop c4, and knight f6. The fight liver can be played here, but fight liver is only for those beginners. Now everyone knows how to respond with the fight liver. Just play d5, capture, knight to a5, bishop check at b5, and c6. Then the pawn will take at c6, and bx c6, and then the bishop will run away. And black will have a better position when white will be up a pawn. So he played d3 instead of the fight liver, and as you can see from the bar over here, it is the Joker piano game. So later, intentions of pushing the pawn to c3, placing a knight at d2 to protect this pawn, and then pushing the d pawn is possible. So I put bishop to c5, so it adds another protector to the d4. Now, Manan Dhyani pinned my knight, and I simply shoot the bishop away by playing h6 and g5. Although it might expose my king, you'll know later in the game why it doesn't really matter. So the bishop moves to g3, and I move to d6 to protect my pawn. He moved to h3, but actually moving c3 is better, as I mentioned previously. Moving the pawn to d4 is possible because he has 3 defenders for this pawn, and I only have 3 attackers for this pawn. Although he might have a dominant, he might gain the center square, but he might drop this pawn. So even if he pushes his c pawn, he still needs to find of ways to protect the e4 pawn. So I played bishop d7 and knight c3. So knight c3 is also a good move because it's also aiming at a happy square of the knight. So I moved to a5, and now the knight moved to d5. Just now I said the knight can gain this square, but it doesn't mean moving to that square. So now I'll simply just take the knight, and after the bishop takes back, I'll push the h5 pawn. It adds more pressure on this two. The knight and the bishop, the 2 minor pieces stuck at the king's side. From here, you guys might also know I might not castle kingside, but the next moves, you'll know. As you can see from the game, I didn't even castle in the whole game. So his knight moved back to d2, but now my pawn storm comes. Moving to h4, his bishop is forced back to h2. Then my queen moves to f6, threatening the normal scholar's mate at f2. So the queen moves to f3, but this gives me a great chance. So now I'll just take the queen, and after taking back, which Manan Dhyani didn't take with the correct piece, taking with the knight will not open his king side, but taking with the pawn, it will have a double pawn structure, and now white's position is very weak. So I move to knight d5, adding pressure on the c2 pawn and the f3 pawn. So now white have to choose one to save, and the c2 pawn is definitely the correct one to save, or else, it'll be a double attack on the rook. So white simply castled queenside, and now my bishop kicking starts. I moved to c6, his bishop went back, then my pawn went to a4, then the bishop came to c4, then my pawn went to b5. As you can see, I gained a lot of tempo. My pawn structure, it's over here, it's really strong, and it's aiming at the king, which is, quite fearful right now. It's quite dangerous for white. So he moved to c3 because the bishop was trapped, attempting to answer an attack with an attack, but I can just simply check with the knight. Even I couldn't check with the knight, I could have done another move, but I can't. If I move back, the bishop will take, and if I move to other squares, it's simply a blunder, except knight e2, an in-between move. Now his king is forced to move to c2, and now I can take the bishop for free. So now his knight takes back, and we find another awesome move. Bishop takes f2. We have taken another bishop, and now white is really weak. However, some of the viewers might scream, wait, I think bishop takes f2 is a blunder because, as what Manan Dhyani might think, a rook to d2 might benefit a white, and the knight can't move. If the knight moves, the bishop will fall, but this is false. Actually, the knight can move to g3. That's an amazing move because the knight is attacking the rook. And if the bishop takes, the bishop can take back, and now the bishop is protected by the pawn, and the rook is not attacking it. Furthermore, moving the knight to g3, if you take the bishop, then you take the free rook, and you definitely win the game. Although the knight might be trapped, but you still gain, and you can't move your rook here because later bishop takes h3 might come. Then if your rook moves back, my knight can just move to g3. If your bishop takes, my pawn takes, and your rook takes, we're just changing a pawn for another pawn. So just to demonstrate it, if I take with my knight, the rook comes, my bishop takes at h3, the bishop comes to g1, and my knight goes to g3. The bishop takes g3. I take at g3, and the rook takes at g3. Now the material is still equal. So of course, Manan Dhyani saw this, and his rook escaped. So now, of course, I need to let my bishop run away, or else it will be taken by the rook. So although the computer suggests to move to c5, I don't really want, because I'm quite scared of d4 and wanted to move to a passive square, which is a7. So I'm sniping d4. So over here, his knight took a free pawn at d6, which I didn't see. But of course, I need saving my bishop is more important. So my king came up, and he ran back. Notice that moving to f5 will lose a pawn, and other squares simply blunders. So my pawn moved to f6. Now this pawn is protected by the king, so it's totally secure. And this pawn is protecting this pawn, and there's a pawn chain right here. Another set of powerful pawns appears in the king side now than the queen side previously. So he's also trying to do a pawn storm. He has two rooks supporting this pawn. His structure is also really strong. So I simply took with my pawn. His pawn took back. Noticed that you can't take with the rook because my bishop is still sniping that square. And I enjoyed the free pawn on h7 and h3. Now he moved to d5, trying to ram open this file so that his rook can come down to in the D file so that it can rampage my base of the pawn chain and take all the pawns one by one. So of course I took it. There's no other good move. If you decline it, then the pawn is a passed pawn and it's like heavily guarded, and it will definitely not end up well. So I took it. The rook took it, but actually taking with the pawn is good because you'll end up with a passed pawn. We notice that this pawn, if you take with this pawn, it's weaker because just now, if I decline it, now this pawn has a pawn chain, so this can support the other one. However, now he takes it. There's no other pawn supporting. This is an isolated pawn. It's a backward pawn. So, however, he didn't take with the pawn. He took with the rook, and now the rook is taking with the rook is a blunder because moving the bishop to e6 wins the knight. The rook can't move back to d4. The rook can't move back to c5 because my a7 bishop is still sniping these two squares. And if the rook moves away, for example, rook d2, my bishop will enjoy the c4 knight. And if his knight runs away, I'll enjoy the rook for I can enjoy the rook for one bishop. So after this, my king can just run to f7 and run to more secure squares, and I'll definitely win the game. However, at that position, Manan Dhyani resigned the game for it. My advantage was too much for a comeback. Yeah, this is my game played in an online tournament. I hope you enjoyed it. And furthermore, do remember to subscribe to my channel. And yeah, thank you very much.